In a world where assumptions rule our first impressions, where we judge before we understand, and where courage often wears the disguise of ordinary clothing, some moments have the power to shatter everything we thought we knew about strength, sacrifice, and the invisible battles fought by those around us. What happens when laughter turns to silence? When mockery transforms into respect? When a simple piece of clothing becomes the barrier between ignorance and truth? This is the story of Sarah Martinez, a 28-year-old woman whose quiet presence in a corporate gym would become the catalyst for one man's complete transformation of perspective. It's about the moment when Derek Thompson's casual cruelty met an unshakable truth that would haunt him, change him, and ultimately teach him that heroism doesn't always announce itself with fanfare. Sometimes the strongest among us carry their battles silently, their scars hidden beneath fabric and forced smiles. Sometimes the most profound lessons come not from books or lectures, but from the devastating revelation of our own blindness to the sacrifices others have made. This is that moment. This is that lesson. This is the story of when assumptions crumbled, when truth emerged, and when one man learned that some excuses aren't excuses at all. They're the quiet dignity of a warrior who refuses to make her service a spectacle. The fluorescent lights of Peak Performance Gym buzzed with their usual Tuesday evening energy. The familiar symphony of clanking weights, rhythmic breathing, and motivational music created the backdrop for another ordinary workout session. Derek Thompson wiped the sweat from his forehead as he completed his third set of bench presses, his eyes scanning the gym floor with the casual confidence of someone who considered himself a regular. At 32, Derek had built what he believed was an impressive physique through years of dedicated training. His biceps strained against his fitted tank top, and his swagger suggested someone comfortable in his own skin, perhaps too comfortable. He had developed a reputation among the gym staff and fellow members as someone who wasn't shy about offering unsolicited advice or commentary, often delivered with a smirk that suggested he found humor in others' perceived weaknesses. The evening crowd was typical for a Tuesday. Office workers shedding the stress of their day through cardio sessions, college students pushing their limits on the weight machines, and the usual collection of fitness enthusiasts pursuing their personal goals. Derek thrived in this environment, where physical prowess seemed to translate into a social hierarchy he had mastered. As he moved toward the water fountain, his attention was drawn to a woman he had noticed several times over the past few weeks. Sarah Martinez appeared to be in her late 20s, with dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail and an athletic build that suggested she was no stranger to physical activity. What had caught Derek's attention, and increasingly his annoyance, was her consistent choice of workout attire. While most gym members dressed in typical athletic wear, tank tops, shorts, and fitted clothing designed to showcase their hard work, Sarah always arrived wearing a long-sleeved, loose-fitting jacket that she never removed during her workouts. Even on warm evenings when the gym's air conditioning struggled to keep pace with the heat generated by dozens of exercising bodies, she maintained her covered appearance. Derek had observed her workout routine with growing skepticism. She focused primarily on lower body exercises, spending considerable time on the leg press, squats, and various machines that targeted her legs and core. Her upper body work seemed limited, almost reluctant, and always performed while maintaining her jacket. To Derek's critical eye, this suggested someone who was either self-conscious about her arms or, worse in his judgment, someone who was lazy about developing a complete physique. The gym culture Derek embraced celebrated visible results, the kind of transformation that could be displayed and admired. In his mind, Sarah's covered approach represented everything wrong with people who came to the gym without true commitment. He had developed an increasingly vocal theory about her behavior, one he shared with his workout partner Jake during their sessions. "Look at her again," Derek had whispered to Jake the previous week, nodding towards Sarah as she adjusted the weight on a leg press machine. "Same jacket, same routine. I bet she's got nothing going on up top. Probably doing those leg exercises to make up for the fact that she won't put in real work on her arms." Jake, a more reserved individual who generally focused on his own workout, had offered a noncommittal shrug. "Maybe she's just cold," he suggested, but Derek dismissed this with a wave of his hand. "Cold? In here? Come on, man. She's clearly making excuses. Probably tells people she has some kind of condition or something to avoid real work. I see it all the time. People who want to look like they're serious about fitness but won't actually commit to the full program." This particular Tuesday evening, Derek's frustration with Sarah's workout style had reached a boiling point. He had finished his upper body routine, and was preparing to move to leg exercises when he noticed Sarah setting up at the leg press machine he wanted to use. The machine was positioned near the gym's main corridor, making it a perfect stage for what Derek decided would be his moment of truth-telling. Sarah was adjusting the weight settings, her movements precise and focused. She wore her usual attire, black leggings, athletic shoes, and the same navy blue zip-up jacket that had become her signature. Her face showed the concentration of someone who took her workout seriously, but, to Derek, her covered arms represented deception. He approached the machine with deliberate casualness, timing his arrival to coincide with Sarah's preparation. "Excuse me," he said, his voice carrying the tone of someone who expected to be heard. "I was hoping to get on this machine when you're done." Sarah looked up with a polite smile. "Of course. I'll probably need about 15 minutes for my sets, if that's okay." Derek nodded, but instead of walking away to find another exercise, he positioned himself nearby, ostensibly to stretch, but actually to continue his observation. As Sarah began her first set, pressing an impressive amount of weight with controlled form, Derek felt his annoyance grow rather than diminish. "You know," Derek said during Sarah's rest period between sets, "I've been watching your routine for weeks now. You've got good form on the lower body stuff, but I can't help but notice you never work on your arms. That jacket must get pretty warm during workouts." Sarah paused, her hands resting on the machine's handles. Her expression remained polite, but guarded. "I manage fine, thanks," she replied simply. Derek interpreted her brief response as confirmation of his suspicions. "I mean, I get it," he continued, his voice taking on what he thought was an encouraging tone. "Not everyone starts with the same genetics. But if you're going to be serious about fitness, you can't just focus on the easy parts. Upper body work is crucial for overall development." Other gym members nearby began to notice the conversation, some pausing their own exercises to listen. Sarah's jaw tightened slightly, but she maintained her composure. "I appreciate your concern, but I have my routine worked out." Derek laughed, a sound that carried more condescension than humor. "Routine worked out? Come on. You're clearly avoiding upper body work. I bet you've got some excuse ready about why you can't take off that jacket and do some real arm exercises. What is it? Skin condition? Old injury? Or are you just not ready to admit you need to start from scratch up there?" The gym around them seemed to grow quieter, though the music continued to play. Sarah's face remained controlled, but something flickered in her eyes, a flash of something deeper than annoyance. "I don't need to explain my workout choices to you," she said quietly. Derek sensed what he interpreted as defensiveness, which only encouraged him further. "Look, I'm trying to help here. I see people make excuses all the time. Oh, I can't do this exercise because of this, or I can't work this muscle group because of that. Physical therapy excuses, old sports injuries, you name it. But the truth is, most of the time, people just need to push through and commit to real change." The words physical therapy excuses hung in the air with particular venom. Derek had unknowingly struck at something far deeper than he could have imagined, but Sarah's outward response remained measured. "I think we should probably focus on our own workouts," she said. But Derek was too committed to his point now, too convinced of his own righteousness to step back. "I'm just saying, if you're going to be here taking up equipment every week, maybe it's time to stop hiding behind whatever excuse you've been using and show some real commitment. Take off the jacket, grab some weights, and prove you're serious about this." Sarah stood slowly from the leg press machine, her full height revealing someone who carried herself with quiet strength. For a moment, Derek thought she might finally take his advice and remove the jacket he had become so fixated on. Instead, she looked directly at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "You think I'm making excuses," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the obvious tension in her body. "You think this jacket is about vanity or laziness or fear of hard work." Derek nodded, feeling vindicated. "I think you're limiting yourself, yeah." Sarah reached for the zipper of her jacket, her fingers pausing at the base. The gym around them had grown noticeably quieter, with several members now openly watching the interaction. "You want to know about excuses and physical therapy?" she asked. Derek crossed his arms, preparing for what he assumed would be a litany of complaints about old cheerleading injuries or tennis elbow. "Sure, let's hear it." Sarah's hand moved to the zipper, but she stopped again, looking around at the small crowd that had gathered. "You know what? You're right about one thing. Actions speak louder than words." She pulled the zipper down slowly, deliberately, and slipped the jacket off her shoulders. What Derek saw in that moment would change everything he thought he understood about strength, sacrifice, and the stories people carry beneath their clothes. Sarah's left arm was intact, toned, and strong from her workouts. But her right arm told a different story entirely. From just below her shoulder to her elbow, her arm was missing. In its place was a prosthetic limb, its mechanical precision a stark contrast to the flesh and blood strength of the rest of her body. But even more shocking to Derek was what he could see of her upper right torso and shoulder area, revealed now by her tank top underneath the jacket. Scars. Not the small, neat lines of cosmetic surgery or the random marks of childhood accidents. These were the complex, layered scars of combat wounds, surgical interventions, and the kind of trauma that spoke of life and death battles fought far from the comfortable environment of a suburban gym. The silence that followed was deafening. Derek's confident expression crumbled into something resembling horror as the full weight of his assumptions crashed down around him. Sarah stood there, her prosthetic arm visible to everyone who had gathered to witness what they expected to be just another gym confrontation, but her dignity intact. "I lost my arm in Afghanistan," Sarah said quietly, her voice carrying across the now silent section of the gym. "Improvised explosive device. Took out our convoy vehicle. I spent 18 months in physical therapy learning to walk again, learning to use this prosthetic, learning to rebuild my life around what I lost over there." Derek's face had gone pale. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but no words came. Sarah continued, her voice steady despite the obvious difficulty of the moment. "The PT you're so dismissive of? I still go 3 times a week to maintain functionality in my remaining arm and to work around the nerve damage in my back and legs. This jacket isn't about vanity or laziness. It's about not having to explain to every person I meet that I left pieces of myself on the other side of the world serving my country." The gym remained frozen around them. Derek's workout partner Jake had moved closer, his own expression showing a mixture of shock and something that might have been shame by association. Other gym members watched with a combination of respect for Sarah and barely concealed disgust at Derek's behavior. Derek finally found his voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. I didn't know. I'm sorry Sarah zipped her jacket back up with her one natural hand, the movement practiced and efficient. "No, you didn't know. Because you didn't ask. You assumed. You judged. You decided that your interpretation of my situation was more important than my actual experience." She gathered her water bottle and gym bag, preparing to leave. "I come here to maintain my strength and mobility so I can live as normal a life as possible after giving more for my country than you could possibly understand. I wear this jacket because I'm tired of having conversations exactly like this one, tired of being seen as inspiration or tragedy instead of just a person trying to stay healthy." As Sarah walked toward the exit, the gym slowly began to return to its normal rhythm, though many members continued to watch Derek with expressions ranging from disappointment to outright anger. He stood frozen by the leg press machine, the weight of his words and actions settling over him like a suffocating blanket. Jake approached him cautiously. "Derek, man, we should probably leave." But Derek couldn't move. He stared at the exit door through which Sarah had disappeared, replaying every word he had spoken, every assumption he had made, every moment of casual cruelty he had displayed towards someone whose sacrifice and strength dwarfed anything he had ever experienced. The woman he had mocked for making PT excuses was a veteran who had lost her arm in combat, who still attended physical therapy sessions to maintain basic functionality, who came to the gym despite knowing she would face judgment and questions about her appearance. The strength he had dismissed was the kind forged in the crucible of war and recovery, tested by challenges he couldn't begin to imagine. As the full magnitude of his mistake began to sink in, Derek realized that this moment would become a watershed in his life, dividing his existence into before and after, before he understood what real strength looked like, and after he learned that his own assumptions about courage and character had been not just wrong, but devastatingly, shamefully wrong. Derek Thompson couldn't sleep. For 3 days following the incident at Peak Performance Gym, he had replayed the scene over and over in his mind, each repetition making his stomach churn with a mixture of shame and disbelief at his own behavior. He had called in sick to work on Wednesday, unable to face the normal routine of his life when everything felt fundamentally changed. The image of Sarah Martinez removing her jacket haunted him. Not just the visual shock of seeing her prosthetic arm and scars, but the quiet dignity with which she had handled his attack on her character. She hadn't screamed at him, hadn't made a scene, hadn't tried to humiliate him in return. She had simply revealed the truth and walked away, leaving him to confront the enormity of his mistake. Derek had always considered himself a good person, someone who worked hard and treated others fairly. He donated to charity, helped elderly neighbors with their groceries, and considered himself politically moderate and socially aware. But the incident with Sarah had revealed something ugly lurking beneath his self-image, something that made him question everything he thought he knew about himself. On Thursday morning, Derek finally returned to work at Morrison & Associates, the mid-sized accounting firm where he had worked for 7 years. His colleagues noticed his subdued demeanor but attributed it to whatever illness had kept him home the day before. Derek went through the motions of his daily responsibilities, processing client files and attending meetings, but his mind kept drifting back to the gym. During his lunch break, Derek found himself researching veterans' experiences and combat injuries. What he discovered made his shame even deeper. Article after article described the challenges faced by wounded veterans returning to civilian life, the physical and emotional struggles of adapting to life with prosthetics, the invisible battles with PTSD and survivor's guilt. He read about the stigma many veterans faced, the constant questions about their injuries, the way their service often became their entire identity in the eyes of others. One article particularly struck him. It was written by a female Army veteran who had lost her leg in Iraq. She described the exhaustion of constantly being viewed as either a hero or a victim, never just as a person. She wrote about wearing long pants year-round to avoid stares and questions, about the well-meaning but intrusive curiosity of strangers, about the way her sacrifice had somehow become public property for others to comment on and analyze. Derek recognized Sarah's experience in every paragraph. The jacket wasn't about shame or laziness. It was about privacy, about maintaining some control over her own narrative in a world that felt entitled to her story simply because of her visible difference. That evening, Derek returned to Peak Performance Gym for the first time since Tuesday. He had debated whether to change gyms entirely, but something inside him insisted that running away would only compound his cowardice. He needed to face the scene of his humiliation, to begin whatever process of accountability was possible. The gym felt different to him now. He noticed things he had previously overlooked. The small placard by the entrance honoring local military members, the way staff members interacted respectfully with all clients regardless of their fitness level, the diverse community of people pursuing health and strength in their own ways. He realized how narrow his perspective had been, how he had turned a place meant for personal growth into a stage for his own ego. Derek learned from Maria, one of the front desk staff, that Sarah was a regular who had been a member for over a year. "She's one of our most dedicated members," Maria told him when he asked if she had seen Sarah recently. "Always polite, always focused. She actually helped design some of our adaptive equipment protocols. We're lucky to have her expertise." The revelation that Sarah had contributed to making the gym more accessible stung Derek even more. While he had been judging her dedication and commitment, she had been working to improve the facility for others who might face similar challenges. Derek didn't see Sarah that Thursday evening or on Friday. By Saturday, he began to worry that his behavior had driven her away from the gym entirely. The thought that his cruelty might have cost her a space where she felt comfortable working out made him feel physically ill. He asked Maria if she had heard from Sarah, trying to sound casual. "She mentioned she might be out of town for a few days," Maria replied. "She usually lets us know when she'll be away for more than a week. Professional commitment. She travels sometimes for work." Derek felt a mixture of relief and continued anxiety. At least his behavior hadn't immediately driven her away, but he still faced the prospect of seeing her again and somehow addressing what had happened between them. On Sunday evening, Derek made a decision that felt both necessary and terrifying. He would write Sarah a letter, a real, honest apology that acknowledged the full scope of his mistake. He spent hours crafting the message, throwing away draft after draft that felt either too casual or too dramatic. Finally, he settled on something that felt genuine. "Ms. Martinez, I don't know if you'll read this, but I needed to try to express how deeply sorry I am for my behavior toward you at the gym last Tuesday. There is no excuse for the assumptions I made about you, the disrespect I showed, or the way I treated your service and sacrifice. I was wrong in every possible way, and I understand if you never want to speak to me again. I just wanted you to know that your dignity in that moment taught me something about strength that I clearly needed to learn. I'm grateful for your service and ashamed of my failure to recognize a hero when I met one. Derek Thompson." He sealed the letter and asked Maria to give it to Sarah when she returned, knowing it was a small gesture that could never undo the damage he had caused, but hoping it might begin some process of repair. Derek spent the rest of Sunday researching local veterans organizations. He discovered that the city had several groups supporting wounded veterans, including a nonprofit that provided fitness programs and adaptive equipment. Reading about their work made him realize how little he had known about the challenges faced by those who had served, despite living in a community where veterans were neighbors, co-workers, and fellow gym members. Monday brought an unexpected phone call at Derek's office. The caller identified herself as Rachel Morrison, a social worker with the Veterans Assistance Coalition. "I understand you've been asking about ways to support local veterans," she said. "Sarah Martinez gave me your name and suggested I reach out." Derek was stunned. "Sarah, she mentioned me? She said you had expressed interest in learning more about veteran services and might want to volunteer. We're always looking for people who want to contribute their time and skills. Are you interested in hearing about some opportunities?" Derek could barely process the information. After his appalling behavior, Sarah had not only received his letter but had somehow interpreted his fumbling attempt at research as a genuine desire to help. He had expected anger, demands for him to stay away, or simple silence. Instead, she had connected him with people who could channel whatever remorse he felt into something constructive. "Yes," Derek managed. "I would very much like to hear about volunteer opportunities." Rachel explained several programs that needed volunteers: a weekly fitness class for veterans with mobility challenges, administrative support for benefit applications, and a mentorship program connecting veterans with civilian career professionals. She invited Derek to attend an information session that Wednesday evening. Derek accepted immediately, then sat in his office chair feeling overwhelmed by the unexpected grace Sarah had shown him. She could have destroyed his reputation at the gym, could have made his behavior a cautionary tale about civilian ignorance and cruelty. Instead, she had given him a path toward redemption he didn't deserve. That evening, Derek returned to the gym again, but this time he approached his workout with a different mindset. He focused on his own routine without commentary on others, observed the diverse community around him with new respect, and reflected on how much he had to learn about strength, service, and humility. As he was leaving, Maria called him over to the front desk. "Sarah came in earlier today," she said quietly. "She asked me to give you this." She handed Derek a small folded piece of paper. With trembling hands, he opened it to find Sarah's handwriting. "Thank you for your letter. Everyone deserves a chance to grow from their mistakes. The VAC does important work. I hope you'll find it meaningful." Derek stood in the parking lot reading the note over and over, amazed by the generosity of spirit it represented. Sarah Martinez had every right to hate him, to make his life difficult, to ensure he faced consequences for his behavior. Instead, she had offered him something he never could have asked for: forgiveness coupled with an opportunity to earn it. As he drove home that night, Derek understood that this incident would define how he chose to live the rest of his life. He could either remain the man who had mocked a war veteran for her perceived weakness, or he could become someone worthy of the second chance he had been given. The choice was entirely his, but for the first time since Tuesday evening, Derek felt hope that redemption might be possible. The weight of his mistake would never fully leave him, but perhaps that was appropriate. Perhaps carrying that weight would remind him to be better, to think before judging, to recognize that everyone he met carried stories he couldn't see. Perhaps the heaviness of his shame could be transformed into the foundation for a better version of himself. Wednesday evening couldn't come soon enough. Derek wanted to begin the work of earning the grace Sarah Martinez had shown him, even though he suspected it would take a lifetime to truly deserve it. The veteran who had lost her arm serving her country had somehow found the strength to help the civilian who had mocked her find his way toward becoming a better person. It was, Derek realized, just another example of the courage she displayed every day, courage he was only beginning to understand. Wednesday evening arrived with Derek feeling more nervous than he had since his college job interviews. The Veterans Assistance Coalition office was located in a modest building downtown, sharing space with several other nonprofit organizations. As Derek parked his car and walked toward the entrance, he wondered if he was making a mistake. What business did he have volunteering with veterans when just a week ago he had demonstrated such profound ignorance about their experiences? The lobby was simple but welcoming, with walls covered in photos of local veterans and information about various support programs. Derek checked in with a receptionist who directed him to a conference room where the volunteer orientation was taking place. As he approached the room, He could hear voices inside discussing program logistics and volunteer responsibilities. Rachel Morrison greeted him warmly when he entered. She was a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and the efficient manner of someone accustomed to coordinating complex support systems. The room contained about a dozen potential volunteers, ranging from college students to retirees, all apparently drawn to serve the veteran community for their own reasons. "Welcome, everyone," Rachel began once the group was settled. "Before we discuss specific volunteer opportunities, I want to share some context about the population we serve and the challenges they face. Our veterans come to us with a wide range of needs. Some are dealing with service-connected disabilities, others are struggling with employment transitions, and many are navigating healthcare systems and benefit processes that can be overwhelming even for those familiar with them." Derek listened intently as Rachel described the various programs. The fitness classes he had heard about were designed specifically for veterans with mobility challenges, providing both physical conditioning and social connection in an environment where participants understood each other's experiences. The Benefit Application Assistance Program helped veterans navigate the complex paperwork required to access healthcare, disability compensation, and educational benefits they had earned through their service. "One thing I want to emphasize," Rachel continued, "is that our role as volunteers is not to be heroes or saviors. These men and women are incredibly capable individuals who have already proven their strength and resilience. Our job is to provide practical support and community connection, not to treat them as objects of pity or inspiration." Her words resonated deeply with Derek, reminding him of his fundamental misunderstanding of Sarah's situation. He had seen her as someone to be pitied or corrected rather than recognizing her as a strong individual managing her fitness goals in the way that worked best for her life and circumstances. During the break, Derek found himself in conversation with another potential volunteer, an elderly man named Frank who had served in Vietnam. "What brings you here?" Frank asked. Derek hesitated, unsure how to explain his motivation without revealing his shameful behavior at the gym. "I recently realized how little I understood about veterans' experiences," he said finally. "I want to learn how to be more supportive." Frank nodded approvingly. "That's honest. Most civilians have no idea what military service involves, especially combat deployment. The fact that you recognize that and want to do something about it says something good about your character." Derek appreciated Frank's words, but wondered if the older man would feel the same way if he knew the full story. Still, there was something encouraging about the veteran's acceptance of his desire to learn and contribute. When the orientation resumed, Rachel discussed the mentorship program in more detail. This initiative pairs veterans transitioning to civilian careers with professionals in relevant fields. The goal is not just job placement, but helping veterans translate their military skills into civilian contexts and navigate workplace cultures that may be very different from what they're accustomed to. Derek's background in accounting suddenly seemed relevant in a way he hadn't considered. Many veterans had developed financial and administrative skills during their service that could translate well to business environments, but they might need guidance on how to present those skills to civilian employers or adapt to corporate cultures. "I'd be interested in the mentorship program," Derek said when Rachel asked for initial volunteer preferences. "I work in accounting and have experience with business operations that might be helpful." Rachel made a note and smiled. "That's excellent. We have several veterans who are interested in business and finance careers. Let me give you some materials to review, and we can schedule a follow-up meeting to discuss specific matching possibilities." As the orientation concluded, Derek felt a mixture of anticipation and uncertainty. He was committed to making this work, but he still worried about whether his motivations were genuine or simply an attempt to assuage his guilt about his treatment of Sarah. Over the next week, Derek threw himself into learning about veteran transition challenges and employment issues. He read government reports about veteran unemployment rates, studied programs that had been successful in helping military personnel adapt to civilian careers, and researched best practices for mentorship relationships. The more he learned, the more he realized how complex and individualized the transition process could be. His first mentoring assignment came the following Wednesday. Rachel introduced him to Marcus Williams, a 26-year-old Army veteran who had served 2 tours in Iraq as a logistics coordinator. Marcus was interested in pursuing a career in corporate supply chain management, but was struggling to translate his military experience into terms that civilian employers would understand and value. "The thing is," Marcus explained during their first meeting at a coffee shop near the VAC office, I managed supply operations for a forward operating base with over 500 personnel. I coordinated everything from ammunition shipments to medical supplies under conditions that would make most corporate logistics managers lose their minds. But when I try to explain that in job interviews, either they don't understand what I'm talking about, or they assume I can't handle normal business operations because everything I've done was military-related. Derek found himself fascinated by the complexity of Marcus's experience and the challenge of bridging the gap between military and civilian contexts. "What would you say were your biggest accomplishments in that role?" he asked. Marcus thought for a moment. "We maintained 99.7% supply availability during my second deployment, even when we were dealing with interrupted supply lines and constantly changing mission requirements. I developed new tracking systems that reduced waste by 30% and improved response times for critical requests. I also trained and supervised a team of 12 soldiers responsible for different aspects of the operation." As Marcus spoke, Derek realized he was describing exactly the kind of skills that would be incredibly valuable in civilian supply chain management: leadership under pressure, systems optimization, team management, and performance metrics that any corporate executive would envy. The challenge was helping Marcus present these achievements in language that civilian employers would immediately recognize as relevant to their needs. "What if we worked on translating those experiences into civilian terms?" Derek suggested. "For instance, instead of forward operating base, we could say remote facility with 500+ personnel. Instead of interrupted supply lines, we could describe challenging logistics conditions requiring adaptive solutions. The core competencies are the same. We just need to make them accessible to people who haven't had military experience." Marcus's face lit up. "That makes sense. I never thought about it as a translation problem. I was so focused on being accurate about my military experience that I wasn't considering how to make it relevant to civilian employers." Their conversation continued for over 2 hours, with Derek helping Marcus identify and reframe his military experiences in terms that would resonate with corporate hiring managers. By the end of their meeting, Marcus had a clearer sense of how to approach job applications and interviews, and Derek felt genuinely useful in a way that had nothing to do with assuaging his guilt about Sarah. After Marcus left, Derek sat in the coffee shop reflecting on how much he had learned from their conversation. Marcus was clearly intelligent, experienced, and capable. He just needed help bridging the communication gap between military and civilian professional contexts. Derek realized that this kind of mentoring wasn't about charity or helping someone less fortunate. It was about facilitating connections between talented individuals and opportunities that would benefit both the veterans and the employers who hired them. Over the following weeks, Derek's work with Marcus progressed steadily. They practiced interview techniques, reviewed Marcus's resume, and discussed strategies for networking within the supply chain management community. Derek connected Marcus with colleagues in his professional network who worked in logistics and supply chain roles, helping him gain insights into specific companies and industry trends. Derek also began attending the weekly fitness classes at the VAC as a volunteer assistant. These sessions were led by a physical therapist who specialized in working with veterans who had mobility challenges, and Derek's role was primarily to help with equipment setup and provide encouragement to participants. The fitness program opened Derek's eyes to another dimension of veteran experiences. Some participants were dealing with obvious physical challenges, amputations, mobility devices, visible scars, while others were managing invisible injuries like traumatic brain injuries or back problems from carrying heavy equipment during deployments. All of them approached their workouts with a determination that reminded Derek of Sarah's focused dedication at Peak Performance Gym. During one session, Derek was helping a veteran named Carlos adjust a piece of adaptive equipment when Carlos mentioned his civilian gym experiences. "I used to work out at one of those big commercial gyms," Carlos said, "but I got tired of people staring at my prosthetic leg and asking questions about it. Here, nobody needs explanations. We all understand that we're working around challenges, and we focus on what we can do rather than what we've lost." Carlos's words hit Derek like a physical blow. This was exactly what Sarah had been trying to avoid with her jacket: the constant attention, questions, and assumptions about her injury and her capabilities. She had just wanted to work out in peace, without having to educate strangers about her service or justify her exercise choices. Derek's intervention hadn't been helpful advice. It had been exactly the kind of intrusive behavior that made veterans like Carlos seek out alternative spaces where they could exercise without explanation or judgment. The realization deepened Derek's understanding of how thoughtless his behavior had been, but it also reinforced his commitment to the work he was doing with the VAC. If he couldn't undo his mistake with Sarah, at least he could ensure that his future interactions with veterans were informed by respect and understanding rather than assumptions and judgment. As Derek's involvement with the VAC deepened, he began to see how his volunteer work was changing him in ways that extended far beyond making amends for his treatment of Sarah. Working with Marcus and other veterans was teaching him about resilience, adaptability, and the different forms that strength could take. These men and women had faced challenges that dwarfed anything in Derek's civilian experience, yet they approached their post-service goals with pragmatism and determination that was both humbling and inspiring. Derek still hadn't seen Sarah at the gym since their encounter, though Maria had mentioned she had returned from her work trip and was back to her regular workout schedule. Derek found himself hoping for a chance to see her again, not to impose another conversation on her, but simply to demonstrate through his presence and behavior that he had learned something from her example. He wanted to show that the man who had mocked her PT excuse was gone, replaced by someone who understood that service and sacrifice came in many forms, often carried quietly by people who asked for nothing more than respect and the space to live their lives with dignity. 3 months had passed since the incident at Peak Performance Gym, and Derek Thompson had settled into a routine that felt more meaningful than anything he had done in years. His work with the Veterans Assistance Coalition had become a central part of his life, consuming his evenings and weekends with a sense of purpose he hadn't realized he was missing. His mentoring relationship with Marcus Williams had evolved into a genuine friendship, with Marcus successfully landing a position as a supply chain coordinator at a major regional distribution company. Derek had also begun volunteering for additional VAC programs, including administrative support for benefit applications and occasional transportation assistance for veterans attending medical appointments. Each interaction taught him something new about the complexity of post-service life and the resilience required to navigate systems that weren't always designed with veterans' needs in mind. On a Thursday evening in late October, Derek was leaving the VAC office after helping a Navy veteran complete disability paperwork when he noticed a familiar figure walking toward the building. Sarah Martinez approached the entrance, wearing civilian clothes rather than workout attire, carrying a laptop bag that suggested she was there for professional rather than personal reasons. Derek's stomach tightened with a mixture of anxiety and hope. This was the first time he had seen Sarah since their encounter at the gym, and he wasn't sure whether she would acknowledge him or prefer to avoid any interaction. He slowed his pace, uncertain whether to speak or simply continue to his car. Sarah noticed him as she reached for the door handle. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, the weight of their previous encounter hanging between them like a bridge that could either connect or divide them. "Derek," Sarah said quietly, her voice neither warm nor cold, but simply acknowledging his presence. "Sarah," Derek replied, his voice catching slightly. It's good to see you." Sarah studied his face for a moment, as if trying to determine his sincerity. "Rachel tells me you've been volunteering here for a while now. How are you finding it?" Derek was surprised by the directness of her question and the fact that she seemed willing to engage in conversation. "It's been educational," he said carefully. "I'm learning a lot about things I should have understood long ago." A small smile flickered across Sarah's face. "That's the point of growing up, isn't it? Learning things we should have known all along." Derek felt a rush of gratitude for her willingness to engage with him at all, let alone with something approaching kindness. "Are you here for a meeting?" he asked, then, immediately worried that the question was too personal or intrusive. "I consult with the VAC on adaptive fitness programs," Sarah explained. "I help design exercise protocols for veterans with mobility challenges and train staff on working with adaptive equipment. It's part of what I do professionally." Derek nodded, remembering Maria's comment about Sarah helping design adaptive equipment protocols at the gym. "That makes sense. I've been assisting with the weekly fitness classes. The work you've done there has made a real difference for the participants." "Thank you," Sarah said, and Derek could tell she genuinely appreciated the recognition of her professional contributions rather than focus on her personal story. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment before Sarah spoke again. "Rachel mentioned you're working with Marcus Williams on career transition. That's good work. The civilian-military career bridge can be challenging to navigate." Derek was struck by her professional assessment of his volunteer work, appreciating that she was treating him as a fellow VAC contributor rather than someone to be forgiven or managed. "Marcus has been teaching me as much as I've been helping him," Derek said honestly. "Maybe more. I had no idea how much skill and experience veterans bring to civilian careers, or how poorly most employers understand how to evaluate military experience. It's a two-way education process, Sarah agreed. Veterans need to learn civilian workplace culture and communication styles, but civilians need to learn how to recognize and value military experience. Your background in business gives you credibility that can help employers understand what they're missing when they overlook veteran candidates. Their conversation was interrupted by Rachel Morrison emerging from the building. Sarah, perfect timing. And, Derek, I didn't expect to see you tonight. Are you two comparing notes on our programs? Sarah and Derek exchanged glances, and Derek sensed an opportunity to demonstrate that he could interact with Sarah as a professional colleague rather than as someone whose personal story made him uncomfortable. Sarah was explaining her adaptive fitness work. Derek said, I was just thinking that some of the veterans I work with in career mentoring might benefit from understanding the connection between physical fitness and professional confidence. Is there a way to integrate those programs? Rachel's eyes lit up with interest. That's an interesting idea. Sarah, what do you think? Sarah considered the suggestion thoughtfully. Physical fitness can definitely impact job interview confidence and professional presence. Veterans who are struggling with mobility limitations or who have gotten out of shape during medical recovery might benefit from fitness support as part of career preparation. Derek, are you thinking about specific challenges you've observed? Derek was amazed to find himself in a professional conversation with Sarah about program development, discussing veteran needs and potential solutions. Marcus mentioned that he felt self-conscious in job interviews because he had gained weight during his transition period and didn't feel like he looked professional. Some of the other veterans I've worked with have talked about losing confidence in their physical presence after injuries or medical treatments. I wonder if there's a way to address physical confidence as part of career readiness. That's actually brilliant, Rachel said. We've been treating career services and fitness programs as separate tracks, but there might be real value in integrating them. Sarah, would you be interested in developing a pilot program? Sarah looked at Derek with what appeared to be genuine professional respect. It would require collaboration between career mentors and fitness coordinators. Derek, would you be interested in working on program design? Your business background and mentoring experience would be valuable for developing something that actually serves veterans' needs rather than just sounding good on paper. Derek felt a surge of excitement that had nothing to do with redemption or guilt, and everything to do with the possibility of creating something genuinely useful. I would be honored to work on that, he said. Rachel clapped her hands together. Excellent. Let's schedule a meeting for next week to discuss this further. I love when our volunteers start generating new ideas for serving our community better. As Rachel returned to the building, Derek found himself alone with Sarah again, but this time the dynamic between them felt completely different. Instead of the awkward weight of his past behavior, there was the energy of potential collaboration and shared purpose. I have to ask, Sarah said, her tone curious rather than confrontational. What made you decide to get involved with the VAC? I mean, really decide, not just the guilty conscience response to our gym encounter. Derek appreciated her directness and decided to match it with honesty. Initially, it was absolutely about guilt and trying to make up for being such an ass to you. But once I started working with Marcus and attending the fitness classes, it became about something else. I realized I had been living in this bubble where I thought I understood strength and commitment, but I was completely wrong about what those things actually look like. Sarah nodded. That's honest. And it matches what I've observed about your work here. Rachel says you're one of the most dedicated volunteers they've had, and the veterans you work with speak highly of you. Guilt might have brought you here, but it's not what's keeping you here. Derek felt a weight lift from his shoulders that he hadn't even realized he was carrying. Sarah's acknowledgement that his motivations had evolved beyond guilt felt like absolution, not because he deserved forgiveness, but because it suggested his work was genuinely valuable rather than just performative redemption. I want to apologize again, Derek said. Not just for what I said to you, but for the attitude behind it. I was so focused on my own narrow definition of fitness and commitment that I couldn't see the actual strength and dedication right in front of me. That wasn't just ignorance, it was arrogance, and it was cruel. Sarah listened carefully to his words. Apology accepted, she said simply. But, more importantly, I'm glad you found meaningful work here. The veterans you're helping don't care about your journey to enlightenment. They care about whether you can help them achieve their goals. And, from what I've seen, you can. Derek felt tears prick his eyes unexpectedly. Sarah's focus on his usefulness to other veterans rather than his personal growth journey was exactly the perspective shift he needed. This wasn't about his redemption story. It was about his ability to serve a community that had given far more than he could ever repay. "Thank you," Derek said quietly, "for the chance to contribute, and for treating me like a colleague rather than a charity case." Sarah smiled genuinely for the first time in their acquaintance. "We're all here to serve the veteran community. Personal histories matter less than current contributions. Besides," she added with a hint of humor, "if we dismissed every civilian who started with misconceptions about military service, our volunteer pool would be pretty small." As they walked toward the parking area together, Derek felt a sense of closure he hadn't expected to achieve. His relationship with Sarah would never be friendship in the traditional sense. Their first encounter had created a context that couldn't be entirely erased. But they could work together as colleagues united by commitment to veteran services, and that felt like its own form of grace. "I look forward to working on the integrated fitness and career program," Derek said as they reached their cars. "Me too," Sarah replied. "I think we can create something really valuable for the veterans we serve." As Derek drove home that evening, he reflected on how much had changed in 3 months. He had begun this journey seeking absolution for his cruelty towards Sarah, but he had discovered something more valuable, a sense of purpose rooted in service to others rather than service to his own ego. His work with the VAC had introduced him to a community of individuals whose strength and resilience redefined his understanding of what courage looked like. The program he and Sarah would develop together wouldn't erase his initial behavior toward her, but it might help other veterans feel more confident and prepared as they pursued their civilian goals. That seemed like the appropriate way to honor both his mistakes and his growth, by channeling what he had learned into service that extended far beyond his personal need for redemption. Derek still attended Peak Performance Gym regularly, but his approach to fellow gym members had changed completely. He focused on his own workout, offered encouragement when appropriate, and remembered that everyone there was pursuing their own version of health and strength. He never again assumed he understood someone else's story based on their appearance or exercise choices. Most importantly, Derek had learned to see strength in its many forms, not just the physical power he had once admired, but the quiet courage of showing up despite challenges, the resilience required to rebuild after loss, and the grace needed to forgive those who failed to recognize heroism when it stood right in front of them. 1 year later, Derek Thompson stood in the community room at Peak Performance Gym, helping arrange chairs for the launch event of the Integrated Fitness and Career Readiness Program. The partnership between the Veterans Assistance Coalition and the gym had grown from his and Sarah's initial conversation into a comprehensive initiative that was garnering attention from veteran service organizations across the region. The program they had developed together combined physical fitness coaching with career preparation, recognizing that confidence in one area often supported success in another. Veterans worked with fitness trainers who understood military culture and service-connected challenges while simultaneously receiving career mentoring and interview preparation. The holistic approach had produced remarkable results in its pilot phase, with participants reporting increased confidence, improved job placement rates, and stronger social connections within the veteran community. Derek watched Sarah Martinez set up an adaptive equipment demonstration area, her movements efficient and professional. Over the past year, their working relationship had evolved into something resembling friendship, built on mutual respect and shared commitment to veteran services. The gym encounter that had once defined their relationship had become simply the starting point of a collaboration that had helped dozens of veterans transition successfully into civilian careers. "Derek, can you help me move this bench?" called Marcus Williams, who had become one of the program's success stories and was now volunteering as a peer mentor. His supply chain management career had flourished, and he had recently been promoted to a supervisory role that utilized exactly the leadership skills he had developed during his military service. "Absolutely," Derek replied, grateful for Marcus's friendship and the way their mentoring relationship had evolved into genuine mutual support. Marcus had taught Derek far more about resilience and adaptability than Derek had ever taught Marcus about resume writing and interview techniques. The evening's event would showcase the program's achievements and introduce expanded services, including partnership with local employers who had committed to veteran-friendly hiring practices. Derek had used his professional network to connect program graduates with opportunities in accounting, logistics, administration, and other business fields where military experience translated well to civilian success. Rachel Morrison arrived with a group of local business leaders who had supported the program's development, including Derek's own boss from Morrison and Associates, who had become an enthusiastic advocate for veteran hiring after meeting several program participants. "This is incredible," Rachel said to Derek as she surveyed the setup. "A year ago, this was just an idea we discussed in the parking lot. Now look at what you and Sarah have built." Derek felt a deep sense of satisfaction, not because the program reflected well on him personally, but because it was genuinely helping veterans achieve their goals. The success stories were tangible. Marcus's career progression, Carlos's return to civilian gym membership after rebuilding his confidence in the VAC fitness classes, numerous other veterans who had found meaningful employment, and community connection through the integrated approach. The real credit goes to the veterans who trusted the program, and to Sarah's expertise in adaptive fitness, Derek replied. "I just helped with the business connections and administrative structure." As guests began arriving for the event, Derek noticed several familiar faces from his volunteer work at the VAC. Veterans he had worked with in career mentoring were attending with their families, some bringing their new employers to meet the people who had supported their career transitions. The room filled with the warm energy of community celebration and shared achievement. Sarah approached Derek as he finished arranging the last row of chairs. "Ready for your speech?" she asked with a slight smile. Derek's stomach tightened nervously. He had been asked to speak about the program's development and impact, but he still felt uncomfortable being recognized for work that had begun as an attempt to atone for his shameful behavior. "I'm not sure I'm the right person to be speaking about this program," he admitted. "You're exactly the right person," Sarah said firmly. "You represent what civilian allies can accomplish when they approach veteran services with humility and commitment rather than assumptions and charity mentality. Your story, the real story, including how badly you misunderstood veteran experiences initially, might help other civilians recognize their own misconceptions and choose to learn rather than judge." Derek looked at Sarah with surprise. "You want me to talk about the gym incident?" "I want you to talk about growth," Sarah clarified. "Your journey from ignorant civilian to effective veteran advocate isn't unique. Lots of people start with misconceptions. What's unique is your willingness to confront your mistakes and do the work to become genuinely helpful. That's a story worth telling." As the formal program began, Derek listened to Rachel introduce the initiative and its impact. She shared statistics about veteran employment rates and highlighted individual success stories, including Marcus's career progression and several other program graduates who were thriving in their civilian careers. When Derek was introduced as the program's co-developer, he walked to the front of the room with his prepared remarks, then decided to set them aside and speak from his heart instead. "A year ago," Derek began, "I was exactly the kind of civilian who made veteran transition harder rather than easier. I had opinions about military service based on movies and news stories. I made assumptions about strength and weakness based on appearances. And I had the arrogance to think that my civilian perspective gave me insight into experiences I had never faced." The room was completely quiet, with veterans and civilian supporters listening intently to his unexpected honesty. "I learned how wrong I was through a deeply embarrassing encounter with Sarah Martinez, who had every right to write me off as another ignorant civilian who would never understand military service or veteran challenges. Instead, she gave me an opportunity to learn, to grow, and eventually to contribute to work that matters." Derek looked directly at Sarah as he continued. "The program we're celebrating tonight isn't my redemption story. It's proof that when civilians approach veteran services with humility rather than assumptions, when we focus on learning rather than lecturing, when we treat veterans as the capable professionals they are rather than objects of pity or inspiration, we can build partnerships that serve everyone's interests." He turned back to the broader audience. "The veterans who have participated in this program didn't need saving. They needed opportunities, connections, and support systems that recognize their existing strengths while helping them navigate civilian workplace culture. The success we're celebrating belongs to them, and to the veteran leaders like Sarah, who designed programming that actually serves veteran needs rather than civilian guilt." Derek concluded by introducing several program graduates who would share their own stories, then returned to his seat feeling emotionally drained but satisfied that he had spoken truthfully about the program's origins and purpose. After the formal presentations ended, guests mingled over refreshments while Sarah and Derek answered questions about program expansion and replication in other communities. Derek was struck by the number of business leaders who expressed interest in veteran hiring and asked for guidance on creating veteran-friendly workplace cultures. As the evening wound down, Derek found himself alone with Sarah while they cleaned up the demonstration equipment. "Thank you," Sarah said quietly. "For what?" Derek asked, genuinely puzzled. "For being honest tonight about how this started. It would have been easier to give a sanitized version that made you look better, but instead you told the truth about civilian misconceptions and the learning process required to become genuinely helpful. That honesty might prevent other veterans from having to deal with well-meaning, but ignorant civilians who think they know better." Derek felt the weight of Sarah's words. "I should have told that story months ago. You've been gracious enough to work with me as a professional colleague, but you never should have had to pretend that our first encounter didn't happen." Sarah shook her head. "I wasn't pretending it didn't happen. I was choosing to focus on what you did after it happened. That's different. Your initial behavior toward me was inexcusable, but your response to realizing you were wrong has been exemplary. That's what matters for the work we're doing together." As they finished packing equipment, Derek reflected on the year that had passed since his cruel confrontation with Sarah at this same gym. The physical space was unchanged, but everything else about his relationship to this community had been transformed. He had learned to see strength in forms he had never recognized before, discovered the satisfaction of service that centered others rather than himself, and built relationships based on mutual respect rather than his own need for validation. "What's next for the program?" Derek asked as they prepared to leave. "Rachel wants to expand to 3 more cities in the state," Sarah replied. "The model we've developed here seems to translate well to other communities. Are you interested in staying involved as it grows?" Derek nodded without hesitation. "Absolutely. This has become the most meaningful work I've ever done." As they walked toward the parking area where their conversation had begun a year earlier, Sarah stopped and turned to face Derek. "I want you to know that I'm proud of the work we've done together. Not just the program outcomes, but the example you've set for civilian allies who want to support veteran communities effectively." Derek felt tears prick his eyes unexpectedly. Sarah's pride in their collaboration meant more to him than any professional recognition he had ever received, because it was earned through genuine service rather than given based on assumptions about his intentions. "I'm grateful you gave me the chance to learn," Derek said simply. "And I'm grateful for your partnership in building something that actually helps people." As they parted ways that evening, Derek drove home thinking about the veterans he would work with in the coming months, the employers he would educate about veteran hiring, and the continued expansion of programming that treated military experience as the valuable foundation it was rather than the limitation it was often perceived to be. The gym where Derek had once mocked Sarah for her PT excuse had become the launch site for a program that honored the real meaning of physical therapy, career transition, and the daily courage required to rebuild life after service. Sarah's quiet strength, which Derek had once failed to recognize, had become the foundation for helping dozens of other veterans navigate their own transitions with dignity and success. Derek still worked out at Peak Performance Gym, but now his presence there carried different meaning. He was no longer the arrogant civilian who judged others' dedication based on appearances. He was a community member who understood that strength came in many forms, that everyone carried stories he couldn't see, and that true fitness meant building the capacity to support others rather than simply building his own ego. The integrated program would continue to grow and serve veterans across the region, but for Derek, its most important achievement would always be personal, not because it had redeemed him from his shameful behavior, but because it had taught him what service actually meant and given him the privilege of working alongside heroes who asked for nothing more than the opportunity to contribute their skills and experience to communities that were wise enough to welcome them. In the end, Sarah Martinez had given Derek Thompson far more than forgiveness for his cruelty. She had given him the chance to discover who he could become when he chose learning over judging, service over ego, and humility over arrogance. It was a gift he would spend the rest of his life trying to prove worthy of, not through grand gestures, but through the daily choice to see strength wherever it existed and to support it however he could.